Hey there, hi there, hello there. We're with you again with yet another edition of Bowen on the Birds. I know, I can't believe it either. They haven't shut this down yet, but somebody out there must like it. And I thank the folks at A2D Radio for continuing and giving us this platform. Have an interesting show today, I think, against the backdrop of the Eagles having completed 2 days of joint practices with the Cleveland Browns and then playing the Browns tonight at Lincoln Financial Field, the Eagles' first home preseason game this year. So we have Tim McManus from ESPN coming up in just a minute. And then after Tim bows out and can't take it anymore, wants to do something more productive with his day, we're going to have John McMullen, another Eagles reporter who is very diligent and has been down there watching all this stuff. So, yeah, we've got a lot to talk about. Let's bring Tim on and get his amazing insights into these 2 days of joint practices. How you doing, Tim?
Les, it's good to be with you, my friend. How are you?
Oh, it's great to be here. This is about as much work as I want to do at this point. So, it's and having guests on who actually know what they're talking about. It's I don't have to do anything at all, really. So it's just a great thing.
That's right. We've had these conversations over the years, Les. So this is old hat.
Yeah, indeed. I wanted to ask you first of all about the news that came down today about Hassan Reddick. I guess Monday's joint practice, he broke his thumb, and he's going to have surgery. And they're hopeful, which is always an interesting word to me, that he'll be back for the season opener against the Patriots, which is less than a month, maybe more like 3 weeks from now, I believe. What do you think of all that?
Well, hopeful has been out there, but I think the Eagles want it to be known that they are confident that Reddick will be ready for the opener. And so that's kind of where their position is. And yeah, he got injured during that joint practice on Monday against the Browns. Got to confirm that he's going to be having surgery. And, I guess the big question is not whether he'll be available, but will he be in any way limited as a result of having a fragile thumb when you're going up against, professional football players trying to get after the quarterback. I mean, can you use your hands in the same type of way to gain separation and power pass and the like, and how effective will you be? And this is on top of the fact that he missed time earlier in training camp with a groin injury. So It's not somebody that's gotten on the field a ton this offseason so far. It's better for this to be happening to a veteran who knows what he's doing and has had double-digit sacks each of the last 3 years, as opposed to a rookie still trying to learn the ropes. I don't think you get too concerned that Reddick's going to forget how to play football. And the news doesn't seem to be too serious, but obviously something worth monitoring, especially early on in the season, if in fact he can't be 100% Hassan Reddick.
And this sort of presages the whole, to me, the backdrop of this season, which is, everybody agrees the Eagles have one of the top rosters in the NFC again. There's nobody that doesn't say that. But we have this history of teams the year after a Super Bowl appearance, things don't go right. You get injuries. I think it was in one of your pieces that I read that the last NFC team to get back the year after losing the Super Bowl was the Vikings in 1974. And that's why, stuff like this starts happening. And, this is not a serious injury, obviously, but you get that vibe going, and it's not the same as it was the year that everything was going so well. And, I think we all have our antenna up, I guess, for stuff like this as it comes along, because we're kind of expecting a big cleat to fall sooner or later. I know Taron Armstrong rode off from Dolphins practice today on a cart. It's an interesting. It's a time of year when you just sort of walk around with your fingers crossed, I guess.
I think that's right. And you also get like small reminders about how things can change very quickly. Like the other day when Jason Kelce went out briefly, and, he got stepped on by an opposing player and he started limping off. And you just think to yourself in that moment before knowing whether it's nothing or if it's something, like, oh yeah, like things can change pretty quickly if somebody of Jason Kelsey's caliber goes down. Same thing would apply to Lane Johnson. And we're talking about some important players here. We're also up there in age from football wise. So that's what they're dealing with. I think that they have avoided the big one so far. And as we know, Les, that's the name of the game. I mean, it's a game of attrition.
That's exactly right. Very well said. Want to get you in on our agree or disagree question today. We've had some people weighing in already online. It's a very simple one. Jalen Carter will make up for the loss of Javon Hargrave to free agency. Javon not only left, but he left to go to the 49ers, which was, kind of a really egregious move on his part. I'm sure he wanted, it was the money, but still to go to the team that lost in the NFC Championship game and has spent the whole offseason lamenting how it didn't have any quarterbacks and it would have won the game if only it had a quarterback. And, and the team that probably is the top challenger to the Eagles in the NFC as we look into the season, not necessarily how it will pan out, but that's the way it stacks up right now. So Hargrave has gone to the 49ers, but they drafted Jalen Carter. And what we've seen so far has just been so dynamic. I mean, I think a lot was made out of the 2 snaps in the preseason opener against the Ravens, but, it was eye-opening. And then the joint practices only reinforced that, I think. And we even had Hassan Reddick, broken thumb and all, saying that Carter moves like Grave, that he reminds him of Javon Hargrave. So I think that's where, this interior pressure is going to come from this year. And I think there's a good chance that they really won't miss Javon Hargrave that much. And knowing that he is their most significant free agent loss, probably. Some people might go with C.J. Gardner-Johnson. I would say Hargrave. But what do you think?
Well, I guess I'll go disagree.
Okay.
I believe that Jalen Carter, if he continues on this trajectory and stays in the right lane, is going to be a fantastic prospect. And we've seen bits of that. And you're right, in that preseason game, very first snap, pierces through into the backfield, just makes the guard look silly, knocks down Josh Johnson, and everybody's like, okay, that's something. And then he gets back on the practice field in the joint session against the Browns, and he's going up against Joel Bitonio, who's an all-pro guard for Cleveland, and he pancakes the guy, just puts him flat on his back. And it's like, that's not supposed to happen, with rookie defensive tackles against all-pro guards. And so you're seeing these flashes that certainly would get an Eagles fan excited, I think rightfully so. And, and we know that Howie Roseman invests in that position, and Jordan Davis was a first-round pick from this team a year ago. We've seen him running with the first team almost exclusively next to Fletcher Cox, who called Jordan Davis a 3-down player now. And he also, and this is not a guy who throws out flowers, I think, a whole lot less, but Cox called Carter special and said that I think that we're seeing why he should have been the number 1 overall pick in April's draft. So there's certainly like a lot to like about what we've seen out of defensive tackle, and in particular Jalen Carter, throughout the course of the summer. That being said, even the best of defensive tackles typically take a little bit of time to bloom until they are, become the full versions of themselves. Aaron Donald, all those guys. And you look at Hargrave, and he put up 11 sacks last year. So that's a big number.
It is
a big number to cover. And I'm not sure that Carter is going to get there quite yet. So while I'm stock up for me on what Carter has done, I'm not going to put him quite at Hargrave's production level quite yet.
Understandable. Very understandable. I always try to take a few minutes in the podcast for the guest to talk about him or herself. And you've had a very interesting path to ESPN. How long have you been with ESPN now, Tim?
Since 2016, Les.
Wow. So 7 years. That's a good run. And before that, you and Sheil Kapadia were a good match for a while there. And you've done a lot of different things in in your journalism career. I remember you first starting out with a radio station, right? When you first came down to NovaCare. Was that what you were doing?
Yeah, so I started out over at 97.5, which I guess was 950 at the time, and kind of lily padded my way from intern to producer, a little bit of sports update anchor, part-time host, that kind of thing. And then two things happened simultaneously. One was the great Brian Seltzer decided to leave the Eagles beat. He was doing it for 97.5. He decided to do a baseball gig instead. So that opened up something for the station. And at the same time, a guy by the name of John Miller gave me an opportunity for an upstart website called Philly Sports Daily. Yes. And those things kind of came right along at the same time. And so I was a reporter for both Philly Sports Daily and for 97.5 to start. And yeah, eventually led to a gig with Sheil that we did over at Philly Mag, Birch 24/7 for a few years. Had a lot of fun doing that. Still a career highlight for me. Still a good friend of mine. Kind of helped us get on the radar of ESPN a little bit. Sheil got there first to cover the Seahawks the year prior. And then a short time later, I came on board with ESPN and yeah, have been there ever since. So not the probably most traditional way to come up, but it's been a fun one.
Did you envision football as something when you started out? You know, with me, I just kind of ended up covering whatever they told me to cover. I covered hockey for a long time, even though I can't skate 5 feet. And then I ended up with football. But I know a lot of guys. I was talking to Mike Kay. You know Mike.
Sure.
He's down in Carolina now. He's really a football. You know, that's what he always wanted to do. He can't see himself covering another sport. And that was never my orientation at all. But how did you, getting into this, what did you want to do?
Yeah. So before I got to the radio station, I worked in newspapers and, I covered a number of things, high school level and that kind of deal. So you're covering football and baseball and field hockey and water polo and you name it, I've covered it. And I didn't have necessarily the orientation towards football, like right out of the chute. Always loved it, but it wasn't like I also loved baseball, Yep. So my cousin is Ronnie Polineski, who was your colleague for a long time over at the Daily News. And she had a connection to Pat Callahan, who was looking for a partner to do a football show with called This Week in Pro Football. He always had Sal Powell as one of his central guests, and he was looking for somebody to come along and do that. So as I was on my way up, we connected and we started doing that radio show out in New Jersey for a small radio station called WVLT. It was an oldie station that we bought time for on the weekends. And so, so that's how I got on the football path. And I was on that way when then, Seltzer leaves, this opportunity comes up. I step into football and that was it.
That's really an interesting backstory. And, you've really you've done very, very well, and there's no mystery as to why. You're a diligent reporter, really thoughtful, very good writer, and you do well on camera too. And that's not easy. It's one of those things that everybody probably thinks they can do, but not very many people are really adept at.
Well, I appreciate that, man. Thank you so much, Les. And I give so much credit to you and to Damo and guys of that ilk for setting the right way on how to do things, as journalists, going from reading you to then becoming a colleague and a friend of yours has just been awesome.
That's very nice of you.
Thanks to you.
Thank you very much. We're going to have to go to a commercial here very quickly. I know you don't have too much more time with us, but we'd like to bring you back on the other end for just a few minutes so I can ask you a couple more Eagles-related things.
You got it.
Hey, Birds fans, the NFL schedule has arrived and Philly Sports Trips has all the details now. Visit the site phillysportstrips.com. This is sure to be an epic season. Be sure to go there now to make sure that you don't get shut out. Join us in Tampa, LA, Seattle, or when we get revenge in Kansas City. Don't want to fly? No problem. Gather up your crew and hop aboard one of our signature boisterous bus trips to DC or New York. Sign up now and make sure to mention A2D. Don't miss out on the best Philly fan experience anywhere. Philly Sports Trip customers always stay at the best hotels and meet NFL legends. Book today.
And we're back as I'm adjusting my laptop here. We have Tim McManus on Bowen on the Birds just for a few more minutes. And before I let him go, I want to ask Tim what he's looking for tonight in this second preseason game. It's so weird. Preseason games are always weird, but when you have one after two joint practices, it's even more weird because it's like you've seen the important guys play already, and you're not going to see them tonight. So what are we going to see tonight, do you think? And what should people really watch out for?
I would say linebacker and safety. I mean, those are the two positions that are still really unsettled here, Les. And if guys can perform at a high level and somebody can separate themselves to become, a starting caliber for each of those respective groups, I think that the coaching staff would sleep a whole lot better. I mean, look at the safety spot. Sidney Brown, I thought, had a good debut against the Ravens. He led the team with 9 tackles. You saw the kind of hair on fire, aggressive style that he wants to bring to the table. He said this week, I want to be a player that is feared. He cited Brian Dawkins and Troy Polamalu. And of course, Eagles fans love that. And it's wide open right now. Reed Blankenship is going to be one of the starters. That seems pretty clear. But the guy next to him could be Edmonds. It could be Kayvon Wallace. And if Brown is good enough, maybe it's Brown. So that's certainly something that I'm looking at. And then linebacker, it seems like a similar deal where Nakobe Dean is expected to be one of the starting linebackers. And then who? Is it going to be Nicholas Morrow? Is it going to be Christian Ellis? Is it going to be Myles Jack, who was thinking about becoming a plumber before jumping in and getting
so he says.
With this team? So those questions are still really lingering out there. And so that's obviously two positions to keep an eye on. And then, running back is still a bit of a mystery here as to what this rotation is going to look like, how many guys they're going to keep. And we didn't see any of Kenny Gainwell or Boston Scott in the last game. It was more of the Rashad Penny, DeAndre Swift deal. And so maybe that reverses tonight and we get a look to see if we can get any hints about how this rotation might shape up.
Very good. Yes. And the safety thing, there's one thing, before I let you go, there's one thing that I'm kind of looking for there. They have all these corners, and they have good corners, very astounding depth at corner. I would sure look at Avonte Maddox or somebody, maybe McPherson, somebody that, isn't going to start outside, and think about one of those guys could be a safety. That it's just not that big a transition, I don't think, especially for Maddox, who's done it before. I just wonder if that's where we're going to end up, because having all these corners is a real luxury. And, you want to keep them. You want to find uses for them. You don't want them all just sitting out on game day or being deep backups. Is there any chance of that, you think?
Yeah, no, I think so. I mean, Maddox is the one that jumps to mind. He's played it. And, he's had some success. I would still say, it still seems like his best spot is at the slot corner. But to your point, if he can be an upgrade there and you have somebody like McPherson who might be able to slide in and do a pretty good job, then that's something that you look at. But to me, this is really the Eagles putting the way they like to build a team structure to the extreme, where they've invested heavy. D-line, we get it. Cornerbacks look solid, but linebacker and safety really shaky this year, at least on the outset here. And they always seemingly allocate the least amount of dollars to that linebacker spot. And now their leading guy at the safety spot, and C.J. Gardner-Johnson, who was tops in the NFL in interceptions despite missing 5 games. They let him go. So this is kind of like can we get by in a Super Bowl hopeful year, with these two positions really not that well built out? And I think that's that's something fascinating that's going to be to watch.
And it's like this happens every year. I mean, last year they were good at those positions, but it was almost by accident. C.J. Gardner-Johnson shows up right before the season. It's like before that they were like, oh, okay, we'll just go with these guys we got. And the linebacker thing, Kazir White was one of those guys. They've signed a couple of those guys every year. Some of them don't even make it to the season. White actually had I thought, a tremendous first half of the season, not a very good second half of the season. But,
Great.
And T.J. Edwards was an undrafted guy they developed. And that just seems to be, and if they don't come up with them, they have Nate Gary and Alex Singleton running around out there. It's just like they kind of take whatever they end up with, and sometimes they end up with something good.
Yeah, and all while implementing a new defensive scheme with a brand new DC. And so this is, not everybody is going to be, quite as sure-footed early on as they kind of get used to a new scheme. It's all these things are coming together. But like you said, Gardner-Johnson was a late add. I'm sure Howie is working it and trying to figure out whether he can address either of those positions before they start, whether it be once they start cutting down players to 53 and a bunch of guys come loose during that time of year, or by trade. I'm sure he's not done tinkering.
Great. Well, I'll let you go now, Tim. You're a busy man. Have fun down there tonight, and I hope to talk to you again soon. And I thank you again for doing this.
Yep, good. Les, it was really nice spending time with you. I'll talk to you soon.
All righty, Tim. Take care. Well, that was Tim McManus, our first guest on today's Bowen with the Birds. We're going to have John McMullen coming up in a few minutes. I hope it's not that many more minutes, because when I don't have a guest, it's just me sitting here talking to you, and I don't know of anybody who can stand much of that. Tim brought up a couple things that I was very interested in. The defense with Sean Desai, we still don't really know how he's going to do this. It's the same basic scheme that you had last year with Jonathan Gannon, but that doesn't say a whole lot, because almost everybody runs some variation of that basic scheme. They've had some, it's basically a 3-5, but they've had some snaps with 4 down linemen in training camp. I know Jordan Davis was asked about this the other day. Is he experienced in being a defensive tackle in a 4-3? He said he was. He did it at Georgia some. I think all defenses are so multiple now that it's, when you say they didn't make a big change from Jonathan Gannon to Sean Desai, it can be quite different within what he wants to emphasize, and whether he wants to go base a lot, whether he wants to go dime a lot, nickel a lot. I was trying to read. We had one of our previous guests here was Jimmy Kempski from Philly Voice, and Jimmy had a thing about who he thinks the starters will be on defense. So I'm looking at this list, and I'm following down, and there's like 6 defensive linemen. I'm thinking, wow, that would really be something if they came out with 6 defensive linemen. And then I realized he had 13 defensive starters, and this was just sort of an early calculation of, he knew that obviously they won't have 13 defensive starters. If they do, they'll be penalized. But the guys that he thinks are doing well right now, and it really is kind of an unformed group, I think, thus far. We expect the defensive line to get a lot of pressure. I know fans are hoping for more blitzing. I know I'm hoping for better adjustments. Don't sit there and watch a team do something to you 15 times successfully and not change anything in your defense. That was what drove me crazy last year, more than the lack of blitzing, really, because I don't think blitzing is that much of a panacea as some people do. I don't think it's 1991 anymore, and you can just totally flummox a quarterback by sending an extra rusher. I think more often you get burned when you do that. But there are times when you need to blitz. There are times when you need to blitz from angles and spots where the offense isn't expecting it, which was always Jim Johnson's forte when he was running the Eagles defense. We're going to have John McMullen up here in a few minutes, I hope. And I want to talk to him about all this stuff that we've talked about with Tim. I want to ask him so we know the only guy we know is out for the season so far is Shaun Bradley, the linebacker from Temple, who is a special teams ace for the Eagles. He hasn't done a whole lot at the linebacking position. I got in a little bit of a kerfuffle on social media the other night when this happened in the Ravens game. I was trying to sort of point out a possible thing that wouldn't be so terrible about this. I said, look, if you're Shaun Bradley and you're kind of on the bubble, which if you're a veteran special teams guy, you're always on the bubble unless you're a Pro Bowler. A year on IR, you're going to get paid your whole salary that you're owed, and you're going to have plenty of time to heal up. And, it's not the worst thing in the world. And but I worded it poorly. And I think some people were thinking that I was, or at least they pretended to think that I was saying somehow this was a good break for Shaun Bradley to tear his Achilles. Of course it isn't. But it's not a tragedy in that he does get his money for the year. It's not like he's going to be on practice squad or, he's going to get cut or anything like that. And, he'll be around the team. He won't be able to practice, but he can rehab and be a part of things. And I come back, Achilles tendon is a tough injury, but he's a young guy. And I think he can come back very strong from it in a season and in the off season. So there's that. That's the biggest thing that's happened so far in training camp as far as creating a spot that creates a special team spot for somebody. And I don't know right now who it's going to be. I'll tell you, I haven't seen that much of these special teams type hopefuls. We know Christian Ellis came on at the linebacking position as a special teams player last year toward the end of the season, made quite an impact, but of course we're already counting on him being there. So he's not going to replace Shaun Bradley. So that's one thing I want to talk to John McMullen about. And obviously I want to get his thoughts on these joint practices, which is really what the league and preseason is all about these days. And this has been coming for several years. It just seems like that's what the coaches want to do. They don't like the preseason games. They don't want to get guys hurt. They don't want to get starters hurt. The joint practices are a controlled environment. You can sort of make agreements about how much hitting there's going to be. You can kind of come to agreements about how much you're going to play your first unit against the other team's first unit. And it gives you an opportunity to, I think, evaluate how your best players are doing. Like if Jordan Mailata has a hard time with Myles Garrett, for example, that's something you'd like to know. And you like to know it without getting Jalen Hurts injured, which you can do in a joint practice and maybe not so much in a game. Well, I think we have John McMullen, thankfully, because I'm running out of things to say. So let's bring John up here. There he is.
Hey, Les.
Headphones and all. There you are. Yes.
Yeah,
How
man.
you doing?
How are you doing, Les? Good to be here.
Very well. It is great to see you. It's good to have you on. I enjoy your podcast with Jody McDonald and read your writings with Sports Illustrated. And what else do you have going on? Is that about it, or are there 5 or 6?
ESPN South Jersey.
Oh, okay.
Philly Boys will be ramping up again at some point. Yeah, so too much. I got too much going on.
You're a Renaissance man, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's better to have something to do. So
Yes.
you know how that goes.
I do indeed. Well, let's get into tonight's. We have a football game, and I was.
Do we?
Apparently so. Yeah.
I would argue, but go ahead.
Yeah. Well, we're going to get into that. I had Tim McManus on before you, and I was talking about the fact that preseason games have always been a little weird and a little anticlimactic, but now that you've added in this whole thing of the joint practices, it's even weirder and more anticlimactic, where the important work with the starters all got done Monday and Tuesday. And now we're going to watch a bunch of guys like Deion Kane run around for a couple hours. And, is there anything you can take out of this? Is there anything you're looking for tonight?
Well, I think there's a couple positions on the back end of the roster you're looking for. I always go back to Barb Levy. I used to cover Dennis Green, the late Dennis Green. And, back in the old days of preseason, he used to say winning is a habit. So he wanted to win preseason games, and he thought that, you got used to it. And Marv was the exact opposite. He was like, if you remember when the Bills were going to the Super Bowl all those years in a row, they'd always get blitzed in the preseason, like 40-7. And people were going, oh, the Bills are not what they used to be. And he was looking for like 3 guys on the back end of the roster is basically what he was trying to uncover. And that's where I think the Eagles are, basically what are those last 2 or 3 spots. And, Tyree Cleveland, for instance, last week and in practice, I think has helped himself. Somebody like that could jump up and surprise people. But as far as the key players, the starters, no, you hit the nail on the head. They got all their work done in the joint practices. And I'm not only talking the starters, the Jalen Hurts, the deference players, Jason Kelsey, we know the list. I'm talking about, even the lesser, like Cam Jurgens, Nakobe Dean. What I think, I could still have a little old school mentality in me. And I say, well, Nakobe Dean had 34 reps last year. It'd be nice to see him out there to get some live reps. But Cleveland's not going to play their good players. So if he is out there, what are you going to accomplish by it other than getting him hurt?
Yeah. And you're not even going to see formations that will help you. Or, scheme or anything like that. So, So I see both sides of it, but I do think the Eagles are making the right decision. And most of the league, they're kind of ahead of the curve usually. Mm-hmm. Most of the league's catching up. Kevin Stefanski is evidently more honest with the Cleveland reporters than Nick Sirianni is with us, because he's told them that Dorian Thompson-Robinson is starting at quarterback. So not only are they not playing Deshaun Watson, they're not playing their backup, Josh Dobbs. They're going right down to number 3. And you're going to see him and Kellen Mond. I feel sorry for the fans because they charge the same price for parking glass and food and merchandise. And it's not the same. Yeah, I just wonder if we're going to continue, in 10 years, if we'll have preseason games or if it'll just be the joint practices. Maybe they'll find ways to monetize the joint practices. Have people come see that. I don't know. But we do have an ad we need to get to here, a very short commercial break. And I will bring you back on the other side of this, John, if you don't mind.
Hey Birds fans, the NFL schedule has arrived and Philly Sports Trips has all the details now. Visit the site phillysportstrips.com. This is sure to be an epic season. Be sure to go there now to make sure that you don't get shut out. Join us in Tampa, LA, Seattle, or when we get revenge in Kansas City. Don't want to fly? No problem. Gather up your crew and hop aboard one of our signature boisterous bus trips to DC or New York. Sign up now and make sure to mention A2D. Don't miss out on the best Philly fan experience anywhere. Philly Sports Trip customers always stay at the best hotels and meet NFL legends. Book today.
All righty, we are back on Bowen on the Birds with our special guest, Mr. John McMullen, veteran reporter, sage, and gentleman of many interests in the sports football, in the sports coverage world, especially NFL football. John, we're talking about tonight's game, and one thing I want to see is if Tanner McKee can do this again. There was a lot made of his performance Saturday at Baltimore, and I was impressed. I don't want to downplay that, but guys, this wasn't something I don't think anybody was expecting. It's not like he's been out there in practice every day, wowing everyone. It's not like he comes in with a great deal of credentials in terms of his perceived potential. So I want to see if he can make those quick decisions and make those great throws in pressure situations, as he did in Baltimore. I don't have anything against him. I hope he can. But I'd really like to see it. While I get that chance, do you think?
Yeah, I'm one of the most. What I was most impressed with Tanner in Baltimore was how quick he was with the processing, and the football came out on time. You look at Ian Book, who is has a little bit more experience at the NFL level, but hasn't played much. He couldn't pull the trigger, Les, and Tanner was making quick decisions, getting the football out, trusting his receivers. Anytime you see that from a young quarterback, I think it's a good thing, because they really tend not to trust themselves. And when you see somebody who is making those decisions, I'm like, remember Clayton Thorson? Some of these, Carson Strong last year, we were all saying, well, the Eagles gave him $300,000 as an undrafted free agent. He was, bad from day one. Tanner McKee is showing some real potential, and that's a positive, because Les, you know how the Eagles work. If they can get a long-term backup that's cost-effective for that whole sort of run on the rookie contract, and then spin them off. Yeah, that was the original plan with Jalen Hurts. They want you to forget that.
Yes,
they want you to forget that. But that was the original plan with Jalen Hurts.
The old AJ Feely.
Yeah, exactly.
Equation. Yeah.
And that's what they want to do. And it's, hey, you can only go on what we've seen so far, and it's mid-August. But I've been impressed with Tanner McKee. I have, and
Great.
He's already won the job. He's won the third job over Ian.
Well, the question to me is, because I was out at practice with you one day there last week, and what I saw and what I keep hearing, Marcus Mariota not knocking the top off of it. He had one good practice against the Browns, I guess, but is there any way Tanner McKee can make that a tough decision for them, I guess, on who's 2 and who's 3?
Not this year, not the backup. Okay. I mean, Marcus is the backup. You're right. He was poor at the beginning of camp. A lot of that had to do with Brett Tote, to be honest. They were trying to make him the backup center. Yeah. And Marcus was playing shortstop along with quarterback every day. And
you can't.
Even when you corral the snap, Les, if it's a bad snap, it's going to ruin the timing of the play. It's going to ruin everything. So ever since Josh Andrews got here, and Josh is probably not going to make the team, but for practice, he gets the football back where it's supposed to be as a center, and Marcus has been a lot better. I'm not saying he's great. I don't think he's the most accurate passer in the world. He's still got the wheels, though. He can still run.
That's the thing. Yeah, I think if they had to use him, their plan would be a lot of RPOs.
Yeah.
And him handing the ball off and limit his passing opportunities as much as possible.
But overall,
a game or two that way.
Yeah, and I think he's a good backup quarterback. You never want your backup to play unless you're San Francisco. Right. They got lucky, but with Brock Purdy, who was their third string quarterback. Usually if you're down to number 2, you're in trouble. I mean, the Eagles don't want Marcus Mariota to play, but if you were grading the backup quarterbacks in the league, he's probably top half, I would say, pretty comfortably.
I agree.
So that's fine.
All righty. Well, I have another question for you here. Shaun Bradley. That's the only season-ending injury the Eagles have really had so far. And it's not to a significant contributor, a guy who played a lot on special teams, was not a big part of the defense. No. But somebody has to replace him on that 53. Who do you think is the beneficiary of Shaun Bradley's misfortune?
That's where I brought up Cleveland, Tyree Cleveland, for this reason. People think, who are they going to replace him at linebacker? They don't have any linebackers.
Right.
Where they need
Ben
to replace him,
or whatever his name is.
Yeah, Ben Van Sumeren, who I think is going to be on the practice squad, but he's not ready.
Okay.
My point is, Shaun was one of their core special teams players, as you mentioned, Les, and he was a good special teams player. And they're not a very good special teams team right now.
True.
So to lose one of your best players is probably a bigger blow than most people realize. Tyree Cleveland came in with a reputation. He played in Denver before as a pretty good special teams player. So if he can, continue to be the type of receiver he's been been Mariota's favorite target with the second unit, and add the special teams acumen into it, I think he could find his way on this roster. When it comes to Shaun Bradley, it might be an extra defensive back.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily think it's going to be an extra linebacker, because I think they're going to be looking to replace him on special teams more than at linebacker.
Okay. Well, that's a good answer. I like that. So my agree or disagree question this week is Jalen Carter. I'm taking the position, at least for the purposes of this exercise, that Jalen Carter can make Javon Hargrave's loss a lot less painful than it might have been. I just see so much ability to bring pressure inside from him. And the thing that really got me thinking about this was something Hassan Reddick, Mr. Broken Thumb himself, said the other day about, he said he reminds him of Grave in terms of the way he gets off the ball. I know rookies often don't, get double-digit sacks and stuff like that, but I think it's possible. I think, I think Hargrave is the biggest loss they had in free agency. C.J. Gardner-Johnson notwithstanding, I would say Hargrave. And B, I think with Jalen Carter, they've done a pretty darn good job of making up for that. How do you see it? He's
gifted, man. He is. Yeah. He is. When people see him play, they're going to get excited. 2 or 3 years down the road, I don't even think you're going to remember Javon Hargrave. I think he's going to be a Pro Bowl player, barring, if he can, mature a little bit. We know the off the field stuff.
Yes.
You're talking about a kid who probably would have been the first pick in the draft if he didn't have those issues. Because remember, Chicago had that pick. They already have a quarterback, and they had the worst defensive line in football. And I did see an interview with Ryan Poles, the GM out there, who said basically he wasn't in a position to take him, and he thinks Philadelphia is a great spot for him, and I agree with him. Yeah. He's going to be a great player. My only question from the jump is, and you saw this with Jordan Davis, as good as that Georgia defense was, from an NFL perspective, it was almost too good because those guys didn't play a lot. They had so much talent.
Good point.
They consistently rotated. So I don't know if he's going to have the NFL level conditioning right away. Jordan didn't have it. So I think that's going to be a work in progress. So when you talk about the numbers, if that's what you're talking about, is he going to get 11 sacks like Javon Hargrave as a rookie?
Probably not.
Probably not.
Okay.
Because I don't think he's going to play that much to get that number. Okay. But I think he's going to be a very good player. Very, very good player.
Understood. Thank you. But when you talk about Jordan Davis, he said a few things the other day that I thought were really, really interesting. He talked
imposter syndrome?
Yes, exactly. Imposter syndrome, how he didn't really believe, that he had the kind of talent that people were saying he had. And that especially after he came back from his injury, he struggled with this. And that really stuck with me because you don't get that during the season from these guys at all. And there was no hint of anything like that with him last year that I remember. And he was a high first-round pick. It's not like he's some guy from, Chagrin Falls or something that just sort of showed up. What did you make of that?
Confidence, and Les, confidence is a big thing with professional athletes, and it can really, sort of wreak havoc with your ability to go out on the field. And he's a very young person. I think one of the things that when you talk about rookie players in this league, just the natural moving and natural life things. You got to find a place to live.
Yeah.
You got to get comfortable in a new city for most of the guys. Where do you go? Where do you get groceries? Where do you go out to eat? All this little stuff that nobody thinks about,
right?
Can be very uncomfortable, and you start to question yourself, and then it seeps out onto the field. And I think Jordan Davis lost some confidence, especially when he came back, and he came back before he was 100%. And all of a sudden, if you're not 100%, well, as good as the SEC is, NFL offensive linemen start, making plays against you. You start to question, do I belong here? And I applaud him for being so honest.
Yes.
And those Georgia guys, N'Kobe, Nolan Smith, Jordan, and even Jalen Carter's a little bit quieter, but they're really smart kids.
Yeah, really well spoken and insightful. I agree. Yes.
Yeah. I think Kirby Smart's doing it right down there. But he lost some confidence, and I think he's got it back, and he's in for a big role this year, very increased role. I'm surprised how much they've used him in 40 fronts. They're 4-man fronts.
Yeah.
He's going to be in the 50 as the nose tackle, but I'm surprised how much they're using him in the 4-man front. So Sean Desai thinks a lot of them. Okay. There's no doubt about that.
We need to get to another commercial here, and then we'll have you back to wrap things up here on the other side, if you don't mind.
Hey, Birds fans, the NFL schedule has arrived and Philly Sports Trips has all the details now. Visit the site phillysportstrips.com. This is sure to be an epic season. Be sure to go there now to make sure that you don't get shut out. Join us in Tampa, LA, Seattle, or when we get revenge in Kansas City. Don't want to fly? No problem. Gather up your crew and hop aboard one of our signature boisterous bus trips to DC or New York. Sign up now and make sure to mention A2D. Don't miss out on the best Philly fan experience anywhere. Philly Sports Trip customers always stay at the best hotels and meet NFL legends. Book today.
All righty, we're back at our final segment of Bowen on the Birds with Mr. John McMullen. And I want to ask John, I was not at the joint practices, but I got all the buzz about the second day being so much better for the Eagles offense, and the offensive line really came together and played well. And then I was reading over all this stuff, and I just happened to catch, as almost a side note in somebody's piece, that Myles Garrett didn't practice Tuesday.
No. Yeah, that was a big part of it.
People were kind of burying the lead there. Yeah. Oh, the offense looked so much better. Oh,
I'm not in that category.
Myles Garrett wasn't there. What the hell?
That's a big part of it. Myles, on day one, boy, not that this is a revelation, but boy, he's a good football player, Les. I mean, he blew up 5-6 reps by himself on day one. And that's one of the things about practice. Also, I think fans don't necessarily get, and even some reporters. I mean, you're not game planning for Myles Garrett. Like if you're playing the Cleveland Browns in the regular season, as an offensive coach, you start your whole week. How do we block Myles Garrett? How do we block Myles Garrett? What are we going to do? We're going to chip him with a back, a tight end, whatever. You're going to have all kinds of help. In practice, you just send poor Jordan Mailata out there and say, hey, just block Myles Garrett.
Yeah.
Good luck doing that. And that's sort of what happened. And he hurt his foot. And they're being very cautious, obviously, as they should be. Yeah, that was a big part of it. If he's out there, it probably doesn't look nearly as good. No doubt about it, because they're not going to game plan. They weren't going to change anything. Right. They were just going to run their offense, and he was probably going to blow up 5 or 6 more reps because that's how good he is. Sort of like A.J. Brown on the Eagles offensively.
Yeah.
I mean, when he makes a play, the Cleveland reporters are saying, so-and-so got beat, Newsom got beat, or one of their corners. Well, it's A.J. Brown.
Right. Yeah. You're not going to be covering him one-on-one very much. Yeah. Or at least you're going to be able to study some film and have some,
have some
conversations
kind of
with your coach about, you should do this, you shouldn't do that. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. One thing that I'm kind of interested in tonight, and you mentioned the back end, all these corners, everybody talks about safety and linebacker, and they certainly are the most sparsely talented positions on the roster right now. But this corner thing, there are a lot of talented guys there. And it has to shake out somehow. And I'm really interested in how it shakes out because it looks like Sean Desai is trying, different guys in the slot. And, I'm this Eli Ricks the other night with that pick 6, man, that was some good stuff. Now, I know Eli Ricks is an undrafted guy. And I happened to, I knew somebody who was at LSU when he was there before he transferred. And I know that he was a guy who had some problems, maturity wise. But hey, pick 6 looked pretty good to me. So, they've got these guys. Job, I like Job. How is this all going to shake out? Who's in the slot? Can they move? I mentioned to Tim McManus when he was on earlier. I still think they should look at moving one of these guys to safety since they don't have safeties and they have 7 or 8 corners that are pretty good. How do you see this?
Well, and number one with safety, I think they're a lot better than I thought they would be. Mainly because Reed Blankenship looks like he belongs.
Right.
And he has been rock solid. He intercepted Deshaun Watson 3 times in 2 days. I mean, he is playing well. And I know he's an undrafted kid, but all I can look at is he played well last year when they put him on the field.
He did.
And maybe the NFL got it wrong with him because he looks like he belongs. And then you start talking about Terrell Edmonds is, he played on a very good defense in Pittsburgh for 5 years for the most part. He's not a star, but he's competent. Sidney Brown's got a lot of talent. How quickly they can get to him. Kayvon Wallace is, I think the new coaching staff really helped Kayvon Wallace because, new eyes, how that works, Les. I think he was kind of pigeonholed by the old group. And all of a sudden, Sean Desai doesn't have any preconceived notions. And he's showing up and to the point that Jimmy Haslam's on the sideline said, get 42's ass. That's how
I saw that. Yeah. How about that?
That's how he's beating up the Browns. So he's been impressive. And even Justin Evans is, the Eagles like his coverage ability.
That's a guy that who lost however many years it was to injury, I guess at least 2. That was a guy who was a well-regarded second-round pick,
second-round pick, starting safety for the Bucs, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and he was a pretty good player. And so I think he's a guy that people forget about that's legit. So I think they're better at safety than people realize. The corners, I think it's locked in. I really do. It's Bradbury, it's Slay, it's Maddox, it's Josh Jobe, it's Kelly Ringo, and it's Zach McPherson. Those are your 6 corners. And they have, you're right. I mean, they like Goodrich, Mario Goodrich. Yeah. They like Mekhi Gardner's been better than Eli Ricks. Yeah. And you just mentioned Eli Ricks in the pick 6. They want to get all those guys on the practice squad. That might be a position where Howie can maybe trade to get a linebacker, trade some of these surplus.
Whenever I think about having a surplus in the defensive backfield and wanting to get guys on the practice squad, I start thinking about Jordan Poyer, who is one of the the top 100. Wasn't he in the top 100 NFL players? Just
7th round pick. Sometimes guys need. Sometimes they need a change of scenery to sort of grow up. Sometimes you never know when something kicks in for a player. But I would say, Cleveland's got a pretty talented team. When you talk about, you mentioned Myles Garrett and Deshaun Watson and Amari Cooper and Nick Chubb. They got a lot of good players. The offensive line, Joel Bitonio, and a lot of good players. We know how many good players the Eagles have. One of the best players on the field was Reed Blankenship.
Yeah,
I mean, he was, and I know it's not supposed to be, but until he plays poorly, I can only say he's playing really well.
Well, I just think when I was first starting out, I covered a lot of schools. I don't think I ever covered Middle Tennessee State, but I covered a lot of like Furman, Appalachian State, Western Carolina, and my point is, those were like at the time 1AA schools.
Yeah.
And if you have guys coming out of those schools who don't have great measurables, who aren't like really fast or aren't really big, or, I think they can't tend to get the level of competition, even if they're good players. I think scouts are skeptical, It's not like he did it against Alabama, and I've seen a lot of guys over the years come out of those schools, and do very, very well. And they weren't high picks because at that level, unless you're a quarterback and, you go to the Senior Bowl or something, you're just not on the radar at that.
Well, I covered early in my career, Les, I covered John Randall in Minnesota. That's when the draft was 12 rounds. 12 rounds. He didn't get drafted.
Yeah.
He didn't get drafted. He's in the Hall of Fame now. So they do miss players.
Yeah.
I remember talking to Nick Sirianni during the rookie camp, and I asked him a question about the tryout players. I said, how does a tryout player catch the eye of Nick Sirianni? And he gave me a good answer. He said, and what he said is, don't miss Adam Thielen. That's his philosophy. Don't miss Adam Thielen. He didn't even get invited to the combine, Les. Yeah. He had one of those, they have those regional combines.
Mm-hmm.
He showed up there. He's 6'2", or he ran a 4.42, and everybody's saying he can catch the ball. And all of a sudden, he's a star receiver in the league for years and years.
Yes.
It happens. So for the people that think Reed Blankenship started for 5 years at Middle Tennessee State, and he replaced Kevin Byard, who's a Pro Bowl safety from the same school.
Yes.
So it happens. Yeah.
Indeed, it does, and I'm all for the guy. I think he's a great story, and he just stepped right in last year. This used to be a real specialty of the Eagles. You haven't seen it as much in recent years. It used to paper over some bad drafts, frankly. The undrafted guys who put Quentin Michaels and
TJ Edwards. TJ Edwards.
Yes. Yes.
Now, TJ was a very good college player. He was second in the Butkus Award voting the year Roquan Smith won.
I don't really think of him in that light because you're right. I knew who TJ Edwards was, even though he wasn't drafted. I had never heard of Reed Blankenship in my life.
Yeah. Well, TJ played at Wisconsin, but he ran a 4.87, so he got pigeonholed.
Yes,
so,
he did.
And he had a bad day. He's probably never run a 4.87 again in his life. And
very good point.
People label it and say, or he can't play, right up until he can play.
I kind of wish they had found some money to keep him here, frankly, but that's just not their way. And you can't complain too much. They get it done. So yeah,
it's funny you say that, Les, because I thought they would take more pride, and they found TJ Edwards and said, we developed him.
This is our guy.
Yeah, this is our guy. And he was, if you looked at Pro Football Focus and all that, they projected his contract at $10 million a year. I said, well, the Eagles aren't paying that.
Yeah.
But he got 6.5. I would have said, bang, he's back. But they went in a different direction.
You could almost say the same thing about Garner Johnson, really. He didn't get the money that we think he would get, but so it goes. Well, John, this has been wonderful. I'll let you get ready for tonight's all-important
Can't wait.
Yes. have fun down there. I wish I was with you, but I'll see you down the road, I'm sure. And I really appreciate you doing this. And I hope everything goes well for you this season. And we will wrap it up on that note for this week's